Welcome to Matters of the Soul. It's lovely to spend time with you. Tonight is live, as you can see from all of the descriptions. It is a live Q&A. So I am here to answer a lot of questions regarding your questions regarding trauma and PTSD. I'm a clinical psychologist by profession, as you know, and I have a clinical practice, and I run this non-profit organization and ministry called Matters of the Soul. So I already have a few questions that were sent to me prior to this event. So I'm going to start off by answering some of those questions so that and as you watch this, and you feel free to please send through your questions on the chat. It will be sent to me. So I will receive it. So from the previous Q&A, we had questions regarding triggers, on trauma triggers. Now, it is and the questions, so it went around, how do I manage those triggers when I'm triggered, and what is a trigger, and how does that work, and how do I deal with it? And I've got some things to share with you there. So I think the important part to remember here is that when we've experienced a traumatic event, or even a traumatic loss, like a sudden loss of a loved one, and I know that's one of the things that many people mentioned, was the sudden loss of loved ones, and sometimes the traumatic, even a violent loss of a loved one. What happens with us is that event, during that event, our mind, our brain, has an emotional center in our brain that it remembers that event, but it almost freezes the prefrontal cortex of our brain, the area of our brain that is the thinking brain. So during that event, our thinking brain is usually frozen, and the feeling brain is activated, and what happens afterwards is that our feeling brain remembers what's happened, and that happens through triggers. So that means something triggers in your environment. It triggers a memory, but the memory isn't a memory of actual, like factual information. It's a trigger. The trigger remembers. It activates a memory in your body and in your feeling center. So it's almost like the other areas of your body remembers. Sometimes we can't even fully point to exactly what it is, that why was this triggered? Why am I feeling this extreme anxiety or panic or nausea or dizziness? All of those symptoms of the initial trauma. So what happens is your body is actually saying, there is something that reminds me of the event and that looks dangerous to me. So I am going to try and protect you from that. And then it brings that, actually your amygdala. Now I'm holding my fist like this because if you remember from previous videos, I spoke about Dr. Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain, where he says this represents the spinal cord and the brain stem, and this represents the prefrontal cortex, or this beautiful small forehead that I've got here, and inside this represents the limbic system, and in the limbic system, that's the emotional center. There are a few aspects like amygdala, hypothalamus, various areas of the limbic system. And what happens is it's that limbic area that remembers, and it's connected to the, almost like what they call the brain, the reptile brain. It's an old model, but it works with explaining how the brain works with trauma. And then what happens is when the trigger is there, your lid is flipped, they say. So your it's like when my hand lifts up, it's almost like your thinking brain leaves and your feeling brain. But then some of the feelings are in your body itself, and that's where your body remembers. So sometimes you are overwhelmed by a feeling and you don't even know why, and you are triggered. And sometimes anger can come out, anxiety, fear, tears, and it can happen quite suddenly. And the way to handle that is actually to remind yourself that I am triggered now. These symptoms are not because of a danger in my present environment, although it feels that way. Because sometimes people, because they have to try and interpret those symptoms, what they do is they say either it's my fault, or there is indeed a danger, or that person there hurt me or upset me. But in fact, it wasn't that person. What they did reminded your brain of something someone else did in the past, which hurt you, and now your brain is triggered. So you are just sitting with triggers, and we can very gently and graciously remind ourselves that that is a past event and it's not in the present. But our body is trying to protect us, and our brain, and almost like take a deep breath and try to come to the here and now. And that's where grounding exercises that I spoke about in previous videos come in, and deep breathing exercises to relax and calm yourself, so that you can come to the place where you are a bit more relaxed, and where you can actually deal with things and then slowly move forward. So what the idea is so that you can connect to people in the here and now, because when you're triggered, you don't feel like connecting, you actually feel like avoiding again. Remember, PTSD it's about avoiding those things that seems threatening to you. So then you want to disconnect, or you want to attack, fight and flight and freeze, tend and please. There goes my reminder to pray for my friends, So I'll be praying for them after this live. So, and what happens here is that we sometimes that makes us feel stuck, because we feel, but why do I have these things? But in fact, it's just your body that is remembering, and it feels terrible when it happens, but it isn't in itself bad, because it shows you that your body is trying to protect you. But it does seem very upsetting, especially if because the brain's actually trying to help you to survive, but it doesn't feel that way, and it definitely doesn't seem like it is helping. But your brain is then trying to just adjust, and you are then, and when you are actually experiencing those triggers and you're acknowledging them, and you can even verbalize them, talk about them, think about them, and what happens then is that you're, in a sense, exposing yourself to the trigger, to the feelings, you're acknowledging the feelings, and you are trying to relax yourself in that moment, which is then teaching your brain that there isn't actually a threat in the present here and now, and that it is okay. You can talk to, you can connect to other people. This is not in fact a danger. But so in a sense, you are not weak or silly when you experience those things, or there's not something wrong with you. It's just your mind that finds it difficult to differentiate the past from the present, because your mind and body are still in the past. They feel like they're in the past, but they are actually in the present. And because the past moment in the here and now feels real, and definitely feels unsafe, but it is in fact not. And it's good to then remember that we aren't in danger. I think what happens is that when we go through that kind of experience, it's important to note for yourself, to recognize when you are reacting to the past. Helps you to know when you are actually safe but triggered. So versus when we are in real danger. So when you are in real danger, you then acknowledge that and you act upon that. But when you are triggered, you acknowledge the fact that you are triggered, and because that, and then you acknowledge. You don't even have to find out what event in the past this is linked to, because remember, the memory is an emotional memory, and during some of those traumatic events, your thinking brain was paused, because there's no time in a crisis to really think through things a lot. You just have to get to safety. But acknowledging this and realizing this helps us to feel less hopeless and less afraid, and also less angry and sad, and And even that we're not crazy. It helps us to know that we are just remembering. Our body is remembering. And what we can do is we can just try to reassure ourselves, um, and that you are in the present moment now, that you've actually overcome that, you've survived it, you've lived through it. You are no longer in the past, although your body is remembering. You can reassure yourself and try to calm that down. So that's some thoughts on that. There's obviously a lot more to say about that, but I think some of this will already make sense, that our brain is trying to help us, so your symptoms are just distressing to you because they feel very distressing, because it's an emotional overwhelming feeling. It's the hyperarousal, the panic, the hypervigilance, the defensiveness, the feeling unsafe, the being reactive, angry, racing thoughts, those things. So it's and what happens is we then start to feel threatened, and that's why we, rather than want to get away from those feelings too, by either drinking or sleeping, or venting it out onto somebody, but that's where we just need to take a time out and just calm ourselves. So that's a thought for the first one, um, on that. And I see I'm going to go through some of the questions that I've received. Now I got a question that says a lot of people go through major traumatic events throughout life. Why is it that as time goes by, I'm increasingly more angry on the inside? How do you get to the release and let go stage? Okay, let's talk about anger and PTSD. So, anger is a very normal reaction to feeling threatened. So that's the fight response. So if you look at all of the previous programs, now I had that list of all kinds of reactions, immediate reactions and delayed reactions. I posted that on Facebook a while ago. There you will see that anger is a very real reaction. But in this question, the question is, why is it that as time goes by, I'm increasingly more angry on the inside? So what that says is that the anger, there's still a feeling of threat. There's still a state of hyperarousal. And that means that there's still that defensiveness of I'm under threat. There might be it might be interesting to now go and or not interesting. It might be important to go and find out why you are angry. If you can pinpoint it, is it because there's maybe a reason that you are still under threat? Is there a constant threat that is still happening? The person is still actively hurting you, or you're still feeling out of control, or frustrated, or hurt? Because anger is a surface emotion. Now suddenly we have, you can't use this service now. What is happening now? I don't know. I just hope I'm still there. It just wants to block me from using. I don't know what is going on now, but let me continue. So what is happening is that your surface emotion is anger, but in fact under it there will be under other feelings that are underneath there, and that says, look, I'm feeling threatened. I don't like this. There are problems, and but if indeed the situation is calmer and there's no more threat in the present, then we should go and have a look at, is there, if you can say you're increasingly getting more angry on the inside, then that means there might be some cognitive reasons, that you are thinking about things, you are still processing this, you're thinking thoughts that might induce anger. Now some of those thoughts might be because of the hurt and the harm that was done, and the injustice of it, or the pain that was inflicted, and it sounds like there's actually support needed to help you to process through some of those feelings, so that you don't so that it doesn't become a place where, because that anger has to go somewhere. It's either going to go out onto people around you, or be suppressed and directed inwards, which can cause depression. And so you don't want to be walking around with a firewall. So either you are in a hyperarousal state, or there's a current threat or an old threat that still needs to be addressed. So I think that has to be done with a counselor or therapist that can sit down and take you through why the anger is there. Many a times it's because of the hurt and the pain, and that we feel resentment and feelings of bitterness against those people. And that's where the Lord's way of forgiveness also makes a difference. And talking about forgiveness, forgiveness means that you are sorry, there's just a post that continues to pop up here that blocks my view. Don't know what's going on. But forgiveness, what's happening there is that you are in a sense saying that because God has forgiven me in Christ of all my sins, I can now release that person and I can forgive. I don't have to sit and I don't have to carry the burden of getting back at that person. What I actually need to do with forgiveness is to acknowledge my own pain, talk it through of the effect that the hurt had on me, and the reason why I'm hurt, and the reasons why I feel angry. It's very helpful to write those reasons down, and then to say we always talk about a pros and cons list as well. What are the pros of sitting with the anger and not letting it go? Then the next question might be, but how do I let it go? Well, all of this is actually helping you to let it go. So to think through why I would rather not sit with this anger against that person, because it's going to intoxicate me with bitterness. It's going to change the way I perceive life. I might become defensive, angry, a victim. I might become bitter and distrusting. So rather than sit and write down those things and then make some decisions on that, it's helpful to also look at your thoughts. Some thoughts fuel anger, like defensive thoughts or thoughts of being threatened. But some thoughts, like judgments, also fuel it. Like if you place a label on a certain person, that stupid person or that idiot, how could he? That kind of thinking fuels the fire of anger. So I'm giving a broad idea because I don't have much detail, but I do see that there is definitely then still some unfinished business with that. A psychologist or a therapist would be able to sit down with you and really go through some of the more details of that. So then there's somebody who asked, will a PTSD person be healed totally? And how will it be certain healing will take place? On average, what is the average time for healing, and what is the best approach in this regard? So that's a very good question. A few good questions there. So I'm going to start off with, a disaster is a disaster. So a heavy traumatic experience is a wound. So and wounds do take time to heal. But then the wisdom there is, it's also important what happens during the time that contributes to the healing. So if you are committed to a healing process and to working through with a therapist, then healing will surely come. There's huge, massive, I'm not sure what's going on here. Sorry, I'm seeing some comments and I'm not sure. What is happening there is that if you continue with the therapy and you work through that, the evidence on the research shows that prognosis is very good for recovery and for full recovery, but it is not a quick fix. So some people, their symptoms improve and normal functioning can almost be entirely restored, but it does depend on how you deal with the treatment or how you also approach the post-trauma event. So what do you do? Do you do all the healthy things to cope? Do you do the exercise? Do you do with the trauma work kind of thing? Depending on, because that's in the previous programs we spoke about that. Understanding it, trauma is the one program, and the other program is how to manage trauma. And there I give lots of inputs on things that you can do. But what is important here is it does take time. Some people take 6 months. Some people get chronic PTSD where it gets stuck, but that's that's a limited number. That's not I won't say that is there. But most people recover. Some people recover within 6 months, but others do have symptoms that linger longer, or that develop a bit later on, or that go away and then sometimes come back after being triggered for a while. It also depends on the type of trauma, the intensity of it, the length of it, for how long you were exposed, and your coping skills and your almost mental health at that stage. How much stress did you have in your life? So lots of stuff. Okay, so that's a question there. Then another question here. I'm going through some of the messages that I've received. This one is: do you perhaps have any assistance with chronic insomnia? Now, I'm going to give you some inputs. Insomnia is also linked to PTSD. It's very clearly linked. Sorry, I just wanted to add something on irritability and anger. I'm going to also post some thoughts on the link between PTSD and anger. So I'll post that later on Facebook, and some things that you can just give you some additional information. But what is happening with insomnia is insomnia is a very it is difficult. So it is, but it is a very real and well researched area of PTSD, and so PTSD associated insomnia is what they call it, and it is and there are treatments. So one of the association, I think of, let me just see what their name is. It's the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. So there is a whole academy that researches sleep medicine and sleep wellness and health. And what I want to say there is that there's an amazing kind of treatment that you can do psychologically, behaviorally, and physically or pharmacologically. So you've got medicine that you can do, you've got all kinds of things that you can implement, behavioral regimens like sleeping at a certain time, waking up at a certain time, and psychological things, the way you think about sleep, the way you talk to yourself about sleep. So yes, insomnia, I know it affects people, and it has a secondary dilemma that insomnia leads to all kinds of other problems, and tertiary, so it has a domino effect. And indeed, it is associated with PTSD, especially with some night terrors and dreams and nightmares that people also struggle with. And there's even a link to suicidality. So it's definitely, they call it trauma-associated sleep disorder. It's characterized by a constellation of parasomnia symptoms and is thought to result from a trauma without the presentation of or full development of full PTSD. So you even get that. So you get lots of problems related to trauma. So and insomnia. So here it is important. There's a thorough physical exam that a doctor can give you with medications. And what they do is they try to rectify the sleep-wake cycle and to get you back into a sleep pattern. And then behaviorally, there are so many interventions. For example, avoiding caffeine or any stimulants, or exercise 3 or 4 hours before bedtime, and reducing the blue light, as you know, and the light and the stimulation, and even not watching very stimulating things like disturbing television programs or eye action stuff, or even eating spicy foods at night. So you've got even a diet that a kind of eating plan that you follow, that you don't stick to. You don't eat lots of things that keeps your stomach busy at night. And then what you do is you also, the way you handle your bedroom, your bed is only reserved for sleep and sex, and all the rest of the activities then move elsewhere. And then there are other things that you can do, and that is like what they call a behavioral. Just want to access that information. There's a very interesting sleep routine that you can then introduce. But it's so there's lots of stuff to say about it. It's actually too much for me to say. And they call it, there's a sleep restriction therapy routine where you actually restrict your sleep. Even though you have insomnia, you restrict it, and then you slowly increase it incrementally, so that your body then adjusts. But what you do is you actually learn to. I'm going to rather advise you to buy a book, and I'll post that, and that book will help you. And the book's name is The Insomnia Workbook: A Comprehensive Guide to Getting the Sleep You Need by Silberman. So I'm going to post that as well, and that name of that book will help you, and it will guide you through step by step to deal with the insomnia, because it is indeed not an easy thing to deal with. But if you can do most of those things, and you can work towards, you'll have to just tackle all of the aspects of what you're dealing with. It shouldn't be done. It should be done properly. So you have to really address all the issues. Personally, what I've done is I've taken away caffeine out of my diet. I don't drink caffeine. It's already reduced anxiety, and because anxiety and hunger are two of the things that keep you awake. And anxiety is also linked to worry and to conflicts with people. So if you have conflicts with people, so you get into a routine of trying to deal with conflict before you go to bed, and trying to deal with anxiety and worry. And when you have anxiety and worry, you write down your worries so that you can check those thoughts. Usually, worry is a way of avoiding a certain problem. It's actually interesting. It's avoidance. So what you're doing is you're avoiding dealing with it, actually. So what you need to do is go and say, why am I worried? What is it that I am fearing or worrying about? And then you'll probably find you are overestimating the problem and underestimating your ability and God's ability to handle it. And usually what I then have to do is I address it. I cognitively address the thought, and I reassure myself. And if there's anything else that I can do to improve my situation, like go and study extra for an exam, or prepare more for a live, because I do prepare for this, and go and sit there and spend some time, because that also reduces the worry and it increases the control. So that kind of thinking, managing your thinking related to sleep disturbances. But what I found in my practice is I've got a few clients at the moment who struggle with the insomnia. And if it's anxiety related, then we have to do almost like what we call a biopsychosocial spiritual model approach, and go and look at their health, go and look at their work rhythm and their routine, and a lot of stressors in their lives. So your sleep cycle has a lot to do with what is going on in your life, and how do you manage your stress. So stress you will have, it's just how you manage it is the other important part. There's a next question. Somebody whose anniversary of her mother's death at the end of this month, from COVID, and I can see from the message that she still experiences, she can't believe. So there's still a sense of disbelief, and that the person is gone. And the question is, why can't I come to terms with it? So I'm going to also refer you to a video that I recorded, Living with Loss, and you can find that on our Facebook page, or you can go to Matters of the Soul on YouTube, and there you'll see you are coming to terms with it. But the experience of saying, wow, I can hardly believe that she's gone, that is normal. It's quite real, and it is expected, because it is death seems natural, but it's actually unnatural. It is, and why I'm saying that is, I still have this pop-up that just pops up from Facebook. Anyways, when you go through an experience of loss and grief, your whole system is adapting to the loss of this person in your life. The emotional connection, the physical presence of that person, the relationship is what we call redefined. And that person is lost, and it's almost like an amputation. You've just lost your arm. It'll take you a while to adjust to the reality of that person's presence, but that's not there, and that arm's presence, that is not there. I think the sense of you can hardly believe it, and on the one hand, that is a bit of shock still, that tends to come and go. But what we also experience with loss is, and we see with loss, is that it is understandable that we can hardly believe it, but then we have reminders of that. So the June, like you say, June the 30th, that is a reminder. So you're already preempting almost the what is happening there, and you cannot believe it. So what I'd like to suggest for you there is, recently we had a similar experience. So we've also lost a number of people during the last few years. So what I would suggest is that you actually have a moment, that you create a moment on June the 30th, where you allow yourself to express your feelings as well, and you maybe have look at some photos, or you do something to remind you of the person. You play a favorite song. What we used to do is we will have a braai and have red wine, because my father-in-law loved red wine, and we'll have that kind of event to anchor it. So what it does is it creates a ritual that anchors it. It's not that you're praying to the dead, or but what it is, it's respecting, and it's just giving yourself a ritual so that you can express your grief. It also doesn't mean you're not letting go. You're actually just acknowledging your experience. In that program, you'll see that I give some of the latest research on loss and grieving, and that it's no longer just the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross model on death and dying that says denial, shock denial, anger, depression, you know, um, all that kinds of things until you get to acceptance. It's not just that simple, or you jump between those. It's gotten more complicated. It's more of a wave pattern of grief, that we experience grief, and it comes and it's intense, and then it goes a bit away. And there's also almost like a pendulum effect, where you move between denial, in a sense healthy denial, because you have to cope during the day, and then moving to expression and feeling overwhelmed, and you tend to move between those. And as time goes by, those things become less frequent and less intense. But then every now and then, with some triggers, especially the first year, the triggers will be more intense. Even the second year, there'll be triggers. But continuously, 14 years after my father passed away on his birthday, I was just triggered, and I burst out in tears. And I allowed myself to sit and to cry, and I spoke to my wife and my children, and we cried together. And it was a beautiful moment, actually. In the end, it brought us together in the here and now. Didn't bring my father back, but it helped me to acknowledge my pain. So it's also not about getting over it. It's about living alongside it, living with it, learning to live with the loss. Because getting over sometimes it sounds like you have to just, or come to terms with it, means you have to now accept it and move on. But you are in the process of accepting. But it's hard. It's your mother. It's hard, But that doesn't mean that you won't get to a place where you would experience life more fully, and that it will be much more of a pleasure, and you will just have this fond memories. But even earlier tonight, we were reminded of our father-in-law's passing with Father's Day yesterday. So we had a moment of grief at the dinner table just an hour and a half ago before this. So we had a moment of grief, looking at some photos, just remembering him, acknowledging feelings, just shedding a tear. And that was good. It's to allow those moments. It doesn't mean that you're going to get stuck in that moment if you do allow it. There's another person that says, I'm stuck in grieving about my mother, and I can't get past the suffering of my mom. And how do you get unstuck? I think what's happening there is that being stuck in grieving, and especially if the person is still suffering, is very difficult indeed, because you're seeing the person. And one of the most important things there is, it's about two things. It's about regulating your own emotion. That means dealing with your emotion, talking about it, feeling it, acknowledging it, and almost being with it, and then proactively trying to do something to make it better. If there's in any way that you can do what you can do to make her suffering better, that will already alleviate and at least give you some sense of control, although you do not have control over the bigger situation. And to also reach out to other people to help you, but like you are reaching out now for some advice, to also reach out to other people that can support you, that can walk alongside you. You see, the process of living and the cycle of life, with living and dying, is hard, but it's also a part of the life that we have here on earth. And but it's in God's word. It's not. There's promises that this won't be the way that life will be, when we are with Him permanently. So that's where no death and dying will be there. It is part of our present life. So it'll also help to view the situation that happens to your mother in the light of the Lord's word, to see it differently, that is actually a passing through for her from a painful existence to an existence with the Lord Jesus. So that changes the way you also approach it, and it also makes it a bit better for you, that it isn't just all a hopeless situation, because otherwise death and dying can become very hopeless, and it can be very hard. Then there's another question here, a comment that the person says, my chest still hurts if I inhale deeply since my husband committed suicide almost a year ago, and I still have a lot of anger. That is indeed very hard, and I do have videos on that as well. If you go onto my Facebook or my YouTube video, I've got an Afrikaans and English videos on suicide and on helping people who is left behind after suicide. Yes, that the pain in your chest is also a symptom of anxiety and a symptom of the stress, which is just alluding to you that your body is a bit in that fight and flight. So when you breathe in, you feel the tenseness of your muscles. So if you go and have a look at the Understanding Trauma video, you'll see there I do explain all the symptoms that you experience when you go through the trauma, and you'll see in the anxiety video. There's a video on almost anything, just not on cooking. But the anxiety video, there you'll see there are lots of symptoms that we experience. So when we go through a trauma like this, our body is almost remembering then, and the pain in your chest is almost also alluding to the tightness of the muscles, but it can also be an emotional tightness, emotional response. So it's almost like the same trigger, remembering that event, the shock of the event. It's also saying that there might be some anxiety still, and some tenseness, and what will happen, what will help you there is relaxation exercises, deep breathing relaxation. They call it progressive muscle relaxation. You can get those on YouTube as well, and you follow the prompts, and it does help some muscle relax and sometimes work, but that needs to be prescribed, obviously, and we're helped, and you have to work alongside a medical professional. But it'll be good to receive some kind of intervention in your body, even if it's a massage. The anger that you're alluding to, that you're talking about, since your husband's passing, that is also understandable. It's part of your reaction to the loss, and to the impact on you of being left behind, the condition, or the situation that he's left you in, and what the circumstances were at the time of his suicide, and what has happened, because it's obviously a massive traumatic loss, and it is extremely impactful. It hits you on a financial, emotional, behavioral, relational level. It affects your whole life. It's almost like a tsunami that goes over your life. I've worked with families who's lost, who's many a times a father who committed suicide, and it indeed is devastating, but it is not. The people do, after a while, and with help, they do continue with life, but the repercussions are extreme. It's the people who are left behind aren't left scarless. So it is something to consider if you have suicidal thoughts, that people who are left behind are indeed injured extremely. But it's understandable that you have anger, and it's also links to my previous comments to the lady who experienced anger there. But it will be part of your own processing to deal with that, and to talk that through, and to work through the loss and the experience. So Many a times what we do is but this helps with when you're working with a therapist to do what we call expressive writing. So to write, I usually say write a letter to that person. It does help you to address certain issues directly, but it does expose you to feelings that could be very intense and overwhelming. That's why you walk alongside a therapist to do that. But it does help you to also express feelings and say things that you might have felt and to deal with those things and to work towards a place of forgiveness of that person. Indeed, it isn't easy. Thank you, Jessica, for posting those links. I also see here somebody said my sister has cancer, and we heard today that her liver is so sick that she has to get chemo at the moment. I'm so broken, and it feels as if I can't breathe. How can I be strong for her now if I'm broken up inside? Um, I do, I do, um, I do hear the intense shock of what you're going through, and how hard it is, and that it's devastating. It's devastating news. It is shattered. It's shattering news, and I can hear that is it's hurtful to hear that, and it's painful. And what you're saying there is that your heart feels so broken, it almost feels like you cannot breathe. Yes, your body is in shock. Your muscles are tightening. You're in an anxious fight and flight response. Your sympathetic nervous system is reacting to say, it's almost like the lid is flipping. That's saying there's a threat, and I feel so overwhelmed with emotion that I can hardly express it. And what it's good there is just to allow yourself to just express that feelings for now. Just to allow yourself to be, and to try to be with people who are safe emotionally, where you can just let that out, and then try to ground yourself, to calm yourself down. And I've used many um, I use body, mind, spirit things now, because you're spirit, soul, and body. So in your body, you want to relax. You take a bath. You know, stay away from stimulants. Try to just maybe maybe sleep, and even if you have to take some sleeping tablets just to help you for now, just to break that thing, and so you can rest. And then from there, your role will be to just walk alongside her, to offer emotional support. That means listening to her in a caring way, hearing where she's at, um, talking to somebody else about your problems and about how deep you are affected, but still staying connected with her, and not becoming unnormal, abnormal, and suddenly moving away emotionally from her. But you can still share your stuff, depending on how she's doing, but staying present, helping on a practical level, spiritual level, praying for her, interceding, gathering people to pray and to support, and then doing those little things that she loves. If she loves flowers, give her that. If she loves little presents, offer her those things. Sometimes we need the tangibles. And send her the scripture verses, remind her that you are praying for her. If she needs to talk, listen. I spoke about active listening skills recently at a course on trauma debriefing, and active listening skills means you're actively listening to where she's at. You're hearing her, but you also being affected by this, it might be very emotional for you. So just expressing to her how much you love her and that you care for her, you're thinking of her, and then practically trying to be there. So you try to provide support on all those different levels, you know. Then there's I see there's some more comments that come through. Thank you for sending through your comments. I really appreciate it. Um, and yes, I see somebody says thank you for listening. I was listening to what you said, but I must go, and the video stopped. And yes, I hear this person stayed with her mother all the years, and that they yes. So that means you were almost in a sense, you were living life together. So you were doing life together. And that is important. So what is happening there is you were very close. Maybe you became a bit more dependent on each other, and your lives were intertwined. So now there's a sudden emptiness, and that distance that it's created now, it's almost like a vacuum. Now has to be slowly but surely filled with other people and more loving and caring relationships. So you need to almost branch out. What I used to do when I was very isolated is I just started attending men's groups at my local church, and just started to slowly but surely build relationships, and just slowly but surely started to form what we call attachments to other people, and it strengthened me, and it gave me strength, and it helped me to find normality again. So in finding and building other relationships, it will help you. But I can indeed understand that it must have been a great shock. The shock is so much greater because you guys were alone and you did life together. As I'm cruising on here, I see there are some more comments. Then there's a comment on how do you get healed from postpartum depression. Okay, postpartum depression, obviously postpartum means after the birth of a child and a baby, that depression sets in. Now, it will be handled mostly in the usual way that we treat depression, but there will be additional support for the mother because, and I just saw somebody today with postpartum depression, so we need to get all kinds of practical help for that person, time to rest, time, physical help, like help with the baby. We had postpartum depression in our own family, and we had to jump in with all kinds of practical help, like routines with taking turns to look after the baby, and to help the mother deal with some of the dilemmas with what we call cognitive distortions. Those are the thinking dilemmas. So some of the problems in self-esteem and in her self-image and confidence, and some of the fears that tend to pop in there that says, I can't do this, I won't be able to look after the baby, this is too much for me. Some of those things, are feeling overwhelmed. Usually sleep deprivation contributes and escalates that, so it's important to get medical help. So here again, we want to address it in a biological, psychological, social, spiritual way. So we look at those 4 dimensions. Now, a medical doctor or a psychiatrist has to help here because the medication has to be specific, because it's important. Some mothers do not want to drink medication because they're breastfeeding, but it's important to now weigh the pros and cons here and to have a look at your health in the longer term. So some of the best results that I've seen have been with people who have held, they've received medication, so usually an antidepressant, and help to relax and to sleep. And then we've worked with the social support system to strengthen that, get people into practically help, and to try to get that person's sleeping routine, so that they can get that sleep in every now and then. And then also, the TLC, and then working with thinking, and then slowly but surely looking after self-care. If there's a way that they can take some me time, some time out, so that you can do some exercise slowly but surely. I see the question, there's can you get it during pregnancy? Yeah, postpartum depression talks about depression that develops after the birth of the baby, but usually there might have been a depressive episode or an underlying depression before the time already that was just escalated afterwards. But yes, and so the idea here is you can also watch my videos on understanding depression and bipolar, and how to practical ways to handle that, because all of those areas influence major depression. Interventions will also help with postpartum, but it has to be dealt with. The evidence shows from research is the best way is to have a combination between clinical pharmacotherapy, so that's medication, and clinical psychotherapy, that's seeing a clinical psychologist, working through some of those things because there are specifics. Some of the events that might trigger it will be sometimes a difficult pregnancy, some personality factors and coping skills, some limited social support. That means limited support from people around them. Usually, a person that might have had a traumatic birth or an emergency cesarean or any of those things that might contribute to all of this, or even some underlying anxiety. I see there's another question. Could you address the grief, anger, and loss of people losing their jobs because of the mandated vaccine policies for healthcare workers and others? Working in healthcare through the past 2 years has been traumatic for many, and losing one's job after doing everything possible to look after others was a slap in the face. Indeed, that's very hard. I also have a video on that. So I've done lots of videos. So I've got a video on managing some of the stress for the COVID healthcare worker, but it's for the person that deals with the health in the healthcare system during this COVID time. I did a video on that because my heart goes out to all of the healthcare workers since I'm an allied healthcare worker myself. And on the front line, it was very difficult, and I think there's still some difficulty there. But I can hear that there's even some additional repercussions here. Having been working through all the difficulties there and sticking through it, then losing your job. What is happening there is the loss of that job. It's also a major change in one's life, and it has a huge impact. So the idea there is that you also work with your feelings. So what we talk about there is it's an event like that has an effect on you. It has an effect on the way you feel and think, and you have, like you say, grief, anger, and the loss, that you experience, loss of finances, loss of the role at your job, loss of a future maybe. So there's a huge effect, and the idea there is what we usually do in therapy is we offer a safe environment. So if you can get a safe place where you can speak and you can talk through some of those things. On the one hand, it's about ventilating feelings, about giving a voice to what you feel. But we don't just want to vent feelings and not really do anything about it. What we'd like to then do is to say, because it's a process of coming to terms with what has happened. If there's still anything that can be done about this, if there's like any legal processes or things that has to be followed, then that might be empowering, or it might be stressful again. And the idea then is to also come to a place where you say, okay, what is the reality at the moment? It is accepting the loss to a degree, and then saying, what is there that I can do about it in the here and now? What is it that I can do now to make that reality better? That kind of loss. The slap in the face, and the insult that goes along with injury, indeed is hard. So when we've been hurt and we've been injured, and the injustice of it hurts us, because we almost have an innate sense of we want to have justice, and we don't want to be unfairly treated and wronged. So it goes about finding out what exactly is it why are you upset? What is it that about the situation that upset you? What is the injustice about? And I love writing again and writing down those reasons why you feel wronged and ill-treated. And you've mentioned some things there about the vaccination and the policies, and then it is, okay, this was the effect on me. How did it affect me? What does this do to me today? How does it affect my feelings and my thinking? And what do I then want to do about it? How do I want to move forward? Sometimes we have to go and actually deal with the conflict with people, but get some facilitation or some person to actually prepare you and to go and have some discussions if it might. But in this situation, it seems like the job is now lost and you have to move on. And indeed, it is anger, and then forgiveness comes in again, and almost the release. And I love to then go to the Lord with this and say, Lord, you know the bigger picture here. You see the injustice. In the end, you are the one who makes all things work together for the good. So you want me to become like Jesus. So you want me to surrender this situation to you, to give this to you, and to trust you for better things, and to trust that you can do something great, even though I was so wronged, and even though something was stolen from me and taken from me, and I gave so much, I sacrificed. And in a sense, that's almost what Jesus also experiences, giving so much of himself, and then many a person gives him a slap in the face. So it's almost like the Lord can use that to give you more insight into Christ, and to help you to see how he's viewing it, and then asking him for wisdom on how does he want you to respond. Many a times he does not want us obviously to give an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but he wants us to forgive. So forgiveness there does not mean that what they did was right. Doesn't mean that you are now saying it is okay that they did this. What you are saying is, I'm going to choose to rather honor the Lord in this situation because he has forgiven me in Christ. Therefore, I'm going to extend that forgiveness to them. I am showing them mercy. Mercy means I'm not going to punish you for what you deserve. Grace means I'm going to give you goodness that you don't deserve. So you are showing the mercy that you have received from Christ. You're going to just extend that mercy to them. And it does cost you something. But what it does benefit you is that it releases you from the bitterness and the inner fight and turmoil that is in your heart. So you are then releasing that anger, and you can actually physically do it. I like to write out a letter and to tear it up and to make it a prayer and to say, Lord, I now surrender this to you, because Christ did do that at the cross, and he said, Lord, he gives the justice to the Lord, because the Lord does hold the scales of justice, and he does not sleep. That's what he told Habakkuk in the word. He sees the injustice, and he's going to handle it. And then what you do is you trust him for the here and now. What is his plan now? How does the future look? And then what is there that you can take from that experience, the positives? I've also had terribly disappointing experiences that have been hard. And it does take time. And you can also allow yourself time to grieve, and sometimes to go through those things and to realize some of those experiences, because I get triggered as well by some of the past things. Some things would just trigger me, and reminders, and I will just acknowledge those triggers, acknowledge the feelings, and then remind myself of how I've dealt with it with the Lord, and just do it again, if that makes sense. Okay, here is another question. It's from Annabelle Bailey. Her husband my husband was experienced trauma last month at gunpoint. He's impulsive, reacting very quickly, being angry, impatient, and I'm worried that it creates arguments, and I'm scared that he might get aggressive. How can I help him? I've introduced breathing exercises 2 days after the trauma as he experienced panic attacks. I can understand your concern. Although his behavior is normal after a trauma, it does seem that he could benefit from help to facilitate his emotional reaction of anger, especially because it is causing fear in you. It is a strong reaction, and it may be due to the injustice of the event or the threat on his life. Because the anger is a part of the fight or flight reaction, and it's the fight part that the sympathetic nervous system is activated when threatened. And yes, your breathing exercises will help to calm him down and activate the parasympathetic nervous system. But I think trauma-focused psychotherapy is indicated here. When we receive education on the symptoms of trauma and the management of how to manage trauma, those things, what it does is it helps us just to at least get a mental frame of what trauma is all about. We can watch our series on trauma and try and implement some of those interventions. Things like writing out your story, following a good exercise routine, usually a combination between cardiovascular and weight training exercises, because it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And and then the other therapeutic interventions, but those a trained professional has to intervene. We also have a video on anger that he can watch. I know that it is quite difficult when you've experienced a trauma and you're angry and you want to rectify what has happened, but you feel helpless. So there's anger because it was so wrong and we were wronged. And now I'm unable to stand up for myself. So usually what we do is we let the person, I find the person where he's at, and then allow him to vent some of the feelings, and usually try to show understanding, what we call empathic understanding, through attentive listening. So those are ways of really addressing his emotions and just letting him talk about it. And usually the incident is remembered in visual images and imagery, and there might be some triggers. So try to then figure out what are the triggers that that triggers the anger response. What are those things so that we can start to prepare for them? And then also look at some of the thinking that has gone through with, because usually there's thoughts involved in anger a response. Things like, words of anger, sentences of anger that arouses or stirs up more anger, like those bastards, those kinds of words. Just so rather get him to express the actual impact on him. And then usually what we also do is we change the way the person the memory changes. So what we do is we help them to visualize things differently. And I've seen people who were held at gunpoint. I've been held at gunpoint myself, and I visualized how the Lord stood between me and the gunman, and it has helped reduce the anxiety and the frustration. But for you not to suppress his anger or try to, and it doesn't seem like you're doing it, but try to, correct him, but rather to tell him that you understand the anger and you understand that he's upset, but you're concerned and you're worried that this is going to lead to further harm, and then you're concerned. And sometimes you even feel afraid, and that you'd like to ask him if he could seek some help on this, because I must say there's very good help available. I hope that helps. Then there's a lady who sent us an anonymous question. She was gang raped. She was in an abusive marriage. And she does see the abuser from time to time. She struggles with nightmares and panic attacks at any sudden movements, sounds, or smells. And she's asking, how do I stop this from happening? Now, you have really indeed experienced terrible things. It's important for you to know and to remember that it is normal for your body and your mind to remember and to react with anxiety when it is triggered through any of the smells or sights or sounds. Now, I can't imagine what you've been through because it does sound extremely frightening. And I can hear that it is affecting your day-to-day living in a negative way, because it seems like it startles you in itself. And that is the startle reaction, the fright that you're experiencing, that sudden experience of, oh, I'm overwhelmed by these triggers. And it does seem like it brings back some of those fears. Now, I must say your symptoms do sound like post-traumatic stress disorder kind of symptoms. Obviously, this is now not a formal diagnosis, but you will also require professional help there. How can you stop these things from happening? In short, a few thoughts on this. You can also watch the trauma series in full. I think that will also give you some more input. But firstly, just like we said, understand that these symptoms are normal, and it's a normal reaction to trauma. And then secondly, trying to understand the pattern of the triggers to prepare yourself in advance. So for instance, if you know you're going to see the abuser again, and obviously try to limit those as much as possible, but I suspect that it is the ex-husband. And if it's possible to try to limit those, that will be the first one. Get away from the abuse, or get away from that person. And the second one is talk to friends, talk to people who you trust, get prayer support. And then also positive self-talk. So self-talk is important. Those are the thoughts that we have in our mind, that we can sometimes have fearful thoughts or uncertain thoughts that that we feel ill-equipped to handle that person or to deal with the situation, and therefore, you start to experience feelings of fear and uncertainty. And that's where therapists can help you with assertiveness and some self-confidence there. Sometimes what we also do is we help the person to visualize how they are handling that situation and that person with ease, and how they are dealing with the situation and how they are going through it without these symptoms and how they're approaching it. Now, I'm saying that in isolation because usually those things happen in therapy. We deal with it in a process. There's a kind of therapy that they call prolonged exposure therapy. And what that does is it exposes you to the symptoms, but we do it on a hierarchy that is very slow. And this also answers somebody else's question that said, I don't want to do therapy because it just makes you remember and I want to forget. And that is understandable. But what we do with prolonged is we expose you to something very, very small, little bit of the trauma, just a slight bit, and then get you to what we call habituate, get used to it, and then increase it a little bit more, and then you habituate and you increase. So we escalate it very slowly, and we sometimes even couple that. It's like an imaginary exposure. So they call it imaginal exposure through visualization or imagery. So we make you remember the incident, but like I had somebody that I said, there's a small television in the corner of the room, and on it is a black and white screen, and it is very distant. There is a picture, just a picture of that incident. How much anxiety does it evoke with you on a 0 to 100 scale? And maybe a lot, but we stay with that image until the anxiety comes down, and we couple it with a relaxation image, like sitting on the beach, relaxing. And then we go back to the exposing and take it just one level up, small little level. Okay, now that is a moving picture on the black and white screen there in the corner. So I did this with a number of people already, and slowly but surely until they're actually visualizing the scene and seeing it. And we can also change the scene so that they're more empowered. We've also, there's a Christian therapy called theophostics that asks the Holy Spirit to introduce Jesus into that scene so that you can see God's presence and how he comes to comfort you and to help you. And that has also had tremendously positive effects. Okay, so those are just some of the things that you can do. Another is to obviously develop, work at your lifestyle. So if you have your diet, and I know we all can't afford, great, health shop foods. So we try and eat as healthy just with what you can. And then you mentioned nightmares. I want to say something because I've got a few questions on nightmares. And nightmares are especially unpleasant. Now, there are effective techniques for post-traumatic nightmares. The techniques are what they call imagery rehearsal therapy. So that's also where something similar to what I just explained, and exposure, relaxation, and re-scripting therapy, so almost similar as well, and EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So the idea there is to modify the nightmare memory into a less stressful dream content. So the therapist replaces the traumatizing situation with new positive images, and the modified scenario is then practiced several times during therapy in order to implement the new imaginative script in the dream. So it's a different kind of scenario, and that's a part of the therapy. So I have found in my own therapy where people have felt safe in therapy, have expressed their feelings. So that's also a form of exposure, spoken through the story. And some people, I also tailor make it according to where the person is and what they prefer, and then take it step by step from there to do the visual imagery coupled with changing some of the scenario and seeing the Lord in that process. Sometimes, if it's a Christian person, sometimes with persons who do not prefer that, we do is we change the memory. And then usually I've seen the nightmares dissipate by itself because the body, it's as if the mind is now finding it easier to store that memory. Okay. Then there was another question. This lady's husband cheated on her for 29 years and she experiences triggers daily. But she's still exposed to his narcissistic personality through gaslighting, controlling, and manipulation. And she will now get a divorce, and she's looking for counseling. Now, this links to our next series, the Boundary series, and there we will have a series, a two-part series on boundaries and abuse. And I'll also have live Q&As there, but I'll just quickly mention some things here. So when you stay in an abusive marriage, I mean, you're affected on many levels chronically. So that's the dilemma. So due to the continuous exposure to the emotional abuse, your psychological system is reacting. And it's also reacting to years of absorbing this impact. And also to the position in the relationship where you feel trapped and you are manipulated and not accepted and not loved, So you are correct in seeking counseling as a support, as a first step to handle this. And now, once you've left the relationship, the emotional stabilizing can begin. It's normal for you to still experience some triggers for quite some time after that, as you start to rebuild your sense of safety and esteem. The most important part, like I said earlier, is getting away from the trauma. So if there's danger, get away from the danger. And then what we usually want to do is get to people who are safer. Now, trust is usually an issue that is broken or hurt when we're dealing with this kind of scenario. It's important to remember that it is that person that hurt me. It's not all people, so can't generalize it. And there are safer people out there. People who do not manipulate and control you. And you can say no to abuse. That's the learning that you have a no. And that's what we'll be looking at next in the next series, is to regain your control. Now, some of the exercises you can do to deal with the triggers, and you'll find those in some of my other videos, are the grounding techniques and relaxation techniques, or what they call, or also mindfulness techniques. Now, these help you to identify the triggers in your body and mind and to name them, and then to refocus on the present here and now situation. Because triggers are essentially memories in your body and your mind that tell you that you're in danger. Therefore, you identify them and you ground yourself in the here and now. You'll see some of the grounding techniques focus on three things you can see, three sounds you hear, three actual things you can feel with your skin, to just bring you into the present moment here. And what it does is it tells your nervous system that is remembering, it is seeing this present danger as or this present situation as a danger. It's almost saying the old thing is happening again, but it isn't really happening. Now, if you're stuck in the same situation, it's still trauma, then yes, it is re-happening. But if it's just a trigger, meaning something that sets off an old memory that tells your system, I'm in trouble. Your system tells you you're in trouble, but you're not really in trouble. Then therefore you ground yourself in the here and now so that your system can learn, oh, it's not a troubling situation. It's okay. You don't have to fight, flight, flee, or tend and please is what they say. So that's what relaxation techniques do. They take you out of that. The mindfulness makes you aware of what it is in a non-judgmental way. What are all those symptoms? My heart's beating fast, my hands are sweaty, all those things. And the relaxation and breathing exercises take you out of the fight and flight into what they call the rest and digest state. Now, you can also then reassure yourself mentally by that the traumatic situation is not happening now. I am safe and it is over. I'm no longer in danger. I'm just triggered. And it's almost like you sit and with anxiety, you ride the wave out. You allow the anxiety just to dissipate slowly. Then another part of growing here is learning to assert yourself when you are controlled, gaslighted, or manipulated, and learning how to control those behaviors and how to handle and manage yourself in those situations will definitely strengthen you. Setting boundaries with abusers are very important in gaining a sense of safety and control again of yourself, that you have that now. So developing that healthy boundary around you, not a 10-foot high wall emotionally, or zero boundaries that are so porous that people can just walk over you. No, a healthy boundary with a gate that has access. So learning what is my responsibility, what's not mine, where do I end, where do the other person start, what are my rights to say yes and no. And it's and some of those things, to also learn the Christian understanding of saying no, that it's okay to say no, especially to abuse. Now, then there's another question from a mother of a 10-year-old son whose father passed away 2 years ago, and he's now acting out. There's fits of rage, and his behavior is affecting his two younger brothers, and she wants to know what she can do to help him. They've been to 2 psychologists already. It seems it's not helping. Now, I've got a few things to say on this. There's a lot to say, but it's normal for children to have difficulty to manage their emotions since they develop these skills into adulthood. So, it's already normal for children to struggle with this. They talk about between 5 and 9 or 5 to 10 tantrums per week for children under 4. We call it tantrums, but it's actually an emotional flooding, and they don't know how to express themselves, and then they have frustration, and they don't know how to deal with that. Obviously, they deal with it in an immature way. And they develop up until 25 still to the skills. But I mean, I know people who are 45 who are still developing anger management skills, and myself included sometimes. So anger is a typical way of expressing frustration at not getting what we want or need, or reacting to a threat or injury or loss. So losing his dad could have contributed to this reaction because he may be experiencing intense emotions that he does not know how to process. He could also have difficulty dealing with the challenges arising from the two younger brothers, some of the battles of sibling rivalry, which is also expected, but it seems like he's sitting with he's already laden. So he needs help to handle the conflict and do the sharing. And then usually, the psychologists assess, what we do is we assess a child's various contexts or situations, such as the home environment, the school, the friendships, all those places. And we try and look for conflict and stress and sometimes bullying or whatever it is, or needs that are unmet. And we try to help the child learn healthier coping skills, ways to express those emotions instead of just lashing out. But empowering parents are a big part of the intervention. So we call it psychoeducation for the parents. Now, treatment usually consists of what they call cognitive behavioral therapy. It's how they think and behave, and then the parental education. But rage and anger could be a symptom of what they call disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, or even oppositional defiant disorder. So those are two various things. So the disruptive mood, it's just that the mood is disrupted more frequently and more intensely than what would normally be expected of a child his age. And that usually sometimes medication is then indicated there. With oppositional defiance disorder, that means defiance against parents as well and against authority figures in his life. Now, all of that might have the root in the loss of his father, because it's a huge loss. But I don't think it is the only variable here. Now, there are a few other variables, and I'm going to add 2 links to 2 articles for you so that you can have a look at those. That might bring up some more information. But I do think there's still some indication here for therapeutic help. It's strange that therapy has not made any difference. Some of the things that you could do to manage the anger, what he could do is, obviously you as a parent, you can learn to manage your anger, because we are actually modeling the behavior for the child. And because the things that you typically model are taking time out yourself when you are upset and when you are frustrated. What I used to do is I would say, I'm feeling flooded now. I'm feeling upset. Could you please give me a few moments so that I can calm down? I don't want to say or do anything that'll be hurtful to you. So please give Dad a few moments. Now I'm just going to take a time out. And they've seen me do that. So obviously also not do it. So I've also made lots of mistakes. But so I would then take a time out, calm down, and then come back and then try to explain what upset me and why. and ask them some things to do this differently. And if I did something that hurt them, I would also apologize and listen to them. So that is very important, because they sit and observe you. How are you expressing this? You know, the I messages, use I messages. I feel this. When that happened, it made me feel this way. Could you rather do this? And then it will make me feel that way. And then another thing is, you know, when we're dealing with a child in distress, we sometimes tend to fall, and you didn't mention this, but we sometimes tend to fall into patterns of, you know, get frustrated with a child and punishing them, and that just escalates the frustration. So maybe you can also try to catch your child doing the right thing. So thus, you know, change your parenting style to, instead of punishment, just punishment, use positive reinforcement. So that means reward positive behavior. And I use this with autistic children as well. So even if there's a slight move towards the behavior that you'd like, you comment on that and you reward that, even if it's a verbal reward, by just saying that. And afterwards you say, you know, I could see that you handled it this way and that way, and I'm so proud of you that you did this and this and that. Yes, we're still going to use you can still work on this and this and that, but look at this, that's already some progress. So just building up, because that child gets into the pattern of also getting negative feedback all the time. So trying to praise the effort as well. I know this is not easy, but it does work. Try to also teach him the consequences of anger through role reversal. So what we do is and this is all done in an atmosphere that is a bit lighter. It's not done in an atmosphere of scolding. It's rather explaining and talking and learning. So he is to tell you how he would feel if somebody acted that way towards him. I'd like to sometimes even take some dolls and say, you know, if this doll did this to that one, how do you think this one would feel? So it's a bit more distant from him, and then he can talk about that and say, you know, just to enhance his empathy. Now, these are all just anger management skills and things that I'm teaching you now, because he has to try to put himself in the other person's shoes. If I'm going to do this, that's how they're going to feel. And to develop that understanding. Obviously, he also has to then be able to see his anger as it arises, so that he can learn to notice when he's getting upset and angry. And, you know, your body has signs. You feel the heart beating faster. You feel the warmth in your neck or whatever. So there's lots of signs, so that he can, what is his signs? How can he now notice it beforehand, so that he can intervene through either a timeout or just ask for a few minutes away, or maybe then just doing some breathing to just calm down. And then what we do is we have a few ways for him to talk to himself, to calm him down. You will notice on the Facebook page, there's Dr. Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. I posted that a while ago. And there's a whole series on helping children understand how they flip their lids, how their prefrontal cortex, the thinking part, is flipped, and their emotional part, the limbic system in here, is active, and how they can start to realize when this lid is starting to flip, so that they can bring it back and calm down, and then think of other ways of handling it. Now, once he knows that he's upset, like I said, timeout is a nice way to calm down, but there are other things that he can go and ask himself when he's during a timeout. What am I feeling? Let me name the feelings: frustrated, sad, angry, alone. You know, I taught my children this, so they're able to name their feelings. And then another question: why am I upset? What is it that bothered me? And so they need to try to understand the reason, and then also to ask themselves whether they are at fault in this situation. Now, it's not easy for a child at first to acknowledge that, not even for adults, but in conversation afterwards, you sit and you take them through these things, not as a way of blaming, it's a way of understanding. So let's look at this, and always try to also listen to his frustration and to hear him out. So otherwise he will escalate. That's very important, you know. And then what adults also can ask themselves thereafter is, what can I do to now manage this situation? What's the best way to manage this? And if he doesn't know, come and ask mom. Come and ask mom, how should I manage this before I just go and scream at brother or whatever? Now, obviously, the first few times it will be a disaster, But slowly but surely, there'll be improvements as you take him afterwards and say, okay, what happened here? Let's go through this. He wouldn't want to do it, but you say, you know what? Um, we can show him a reward if he handles this, but there is also a punishment if he doesn't handle this. Then you'll be left with no other choice but to give him some kind of punishment. And then and another nice question that I've asked my children is, what would you advise another child who's now gotten angry for these reasons? Do you think they're reasonable? How would you advise them to handle this? Because the child needs skills. They need ways to express their emotions. They need sentences. I feel this way. When you do that, it makes me feel this way. Could you rather do this? Many a times it will be because they feel that the brothers are unfair, or they are in their way, or they're frustrating them. So we also have to handle the other people in the system. So I said it's a long answer, and there will still be a lot to say. But I do hope these thoughts already make a difference. Please continue to send through your questions to Matters of the Soul. We love to answer those, and look out for our continual series on of the whole series on trauma that we just finished, and some of the other videos that we'll also be showing, and then the next series on boundaries. God bless, and we'll speak again. Goodbye.